Under the glare of studio lights, the air snapped like static. 1,000 murmurs collided at once, the live audience frozen between disbelief and fascination. Julia Roberts stood, shoulders trembling but chin high, her eyes a storm of hurt and defiance. The cameras didn't blink. Neither did Whoopi. "I'm not doing this anymore," Julia said, voice cracking like glass against marble. The words sliced through the chatter, through the cheerful set design and coffee mugs, and the artificial warmth of morning television. For a split second, the studio fell into sacred silence, the kind that only comes when truth crashes through performance. A producer offstage gestured wildly for a commercial break. The red light above the camera still burned. Live. Millions were watching. Whoopi leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable, a smirk ghosting across her lips as though she'd just witnessed a confession instead of a collapse. "Well," she said softly, "that's one way to leave the table?" Julia's breath caught. The audience gasped. Someone in the crowd muttered, "What just happened?" And a dozen phones came up, recording, already stitching the moment into internet history. Julia turned, her heels echoing like a drumbeat of finality. Every step toward the exit felt heavier than the last. The image burned into America's living rooms, the nation's beloved heroine walking away from one of television's most untouchable figures. On Twitter, hashtags were already forming. "Fi Julia storms off," "5U meltdown," "To Whoopi vs. Julia." Clips looped and replayed within minutes, replaying the split second where grace met fury. But inside that studio, something deeper lingered, an unease that went beyond ego or misunderstanding. There was something principled about Julia's retreat, a quiet dignity that contrasted sharply with the smirking control she left behind. The applause sign never lit again. The host sat in uneasy silence. Someone whispered, "Cut to break," but the moment had already imprinted itself in the national bloodstream. Out in the hallway, Julia exhaled. One long, trembling breath that sounded like the release of years of restraint. She didn't look back. And as the world scrambled to decode what had just happened, few realized that this was more than a celebrity clash. It was the beginning of a reckoning. But what sparked this on-air eruption was more than a disagreement. It was a collision of values that had been building for years. The morning had started like any other on The View. Mugs clinking, laughter ricocheting off bright studio walls, and Whoopi's familiar drawl warming up the crowd. Julia Roberts, radiant as ever, sat poised at the edge of the table, her trademark smile effortless, her presence a kind of quiet sunshine. The cameras loved her, they always had. "Julia, you've been busy," Whoopi said, eyes gleaming. "Another film, a charity gala, and now, an activist too." The tone was teasing, but the undercurrent carried something sharper, like a blade wrapped in velvet. Julia chuckled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I just think if you have a platform, you use it for good. It's not activism, it's responsibility." Whoopi tilted her head, the smile fading just slightly. "But isn't it easy to talk about responsibility when you've got a private jet and a Malibu view? Some people might say it's convenient compassion." The audience laughed nervously. A co-host shifted in her seat. The tension was invisible, but everyone felt it. Julia blinked, her smile faltering. "I think caring doesn't need to pass a purity test, Whoopi. You can be privileged and care deeply. They're not opposites." Whoopi leaned in, voice dropping. "Sure, but when celebrities pick causes like fashion trends, it cheapens the real fight, doesn't it?" The warmth in the room evaporated. Julia's fingers tightened around her coffee mug. "I don't do this for image," she said, her voice lower now, the faintest tremor of emotion creeping in. "I do it because I believe in it." Whoopi's eyebrow lifted, a challenge, silent but heavy, the kind that only two powerful women could exchange on live television. The laughter from earlier felt like it belonged to another world. The cameras zoomed closer, catching every flicker of emotion. The audience sat in suspended quiet, unsure if they were watching entertainment or confrontation. Julia tried to steady her breathing, to return to grace. But something had cracked. The questions weren't just about activism anymore. They were about authenticity, about who gets to be believed when they say they care. And in that fragile moment, the show teetered on the edge of history. No one on that set realized they were about to witness the most explosive 5 minutes in daytime TV history. For decades, Whoopi Goldberg had been untouchable, Hollywood royalty in her own right, a woman who had conquered every corner of the industry. An EGOT winner, a trailblazer, a survivor. She'd built her name on blunt honesty, wielding truth like a sword in a world of masks and manners. On The View, that truth became her trademark. Raw, unfiltered, unapologetic. Millions tuned in not just for her humor, but for the fire that lived behind her words. But fame ages differently for those who've seen too much. Over the years, the laughter lines hardened into skepticism, and the fire of conviction sometimes blurred into something darker. Cynicism disguised as wisdom. She'd sat across from hundreds of stars selling inspiration, and she'd learned to spot the performance beneath the polish. To her, Hollywood sincerity was a costume, and she refused to wear it. She had earned the right to question anyone. From presidents to pop stars, no one was immune. The audience trusted her because she challenged people, cut through PR gloss and forced discomfort where others offered applause. In her mind, that was integrity. That was her truth. But truth, when wielded without compassion, can start to sound like arrogance. Whoopi's power came from her dominance, her ability to control a room, to corner her guests, to win every exchange with laughter or logic. Yet behind the confidence was a fatigue she'd never admit. Years of debates, headlines, and outrage had left her wary of idealism. When younger celebrities spoke about hope or kindness, she heard naivety. When they spoke about change, she heard branding. Julia Roberts, to her, represented everything she distrusted. Hollywood charm packaged as moral authority. A woman adored for grace and beauty, now stepping into the moral spotlight. Whoopi had seen it before, stars chasing depth when their spotlight dimmed. And so, as Julia took her seat that morning, smiling and composed, Whoopi's instinct wasn't admiration. It was resistance. Not because she hated her, but because she didn't believe her. And that disbelief, quiet, simmering, righteous, was the spark waiting for oxygen. And that's exactly why, when Julia Roberts walked onto that set, Whoopi was ready for a fight. Even if she didn't know it yet, Julia Roberts was never supposed to be a star. She was the girl from Smyrna, Georgia, a small-town dreamer with a crooked smile and a laugh that seemed too real for Hollywood. Her mother ran an acting workshop for local kids, her father read poetry at the dinner table, and their home was more filled with hope than money. When Julia spoke about her childhood, she always said the same thing: "We didn't have much, but we had each other." That kind of grounding doesn't wash off easily, even under the bright lights of Los Angeles. When she first arrived in Hollywood, agents called her teeth too big, her laugh too loud, her southern lilt too distracting. But she refused to be polished into predictability. And maybe that's why America fell in love with her. Julia's rise was a slow burn, from Mystic Pizza to Pretty Woman to Erin Brockovich. But what set her apart wasn't just beauty or charm. It was the quiet conviction behind her eyes, the kind that said, "I've earned this." Over the years, Julia managed something rare in the chaos of celebrity. She stayed kind. She avoided tabloid feuds, skipped political rants, and used her fame like a whisper, not a megaphone. She funded schools, donated privately to children's hospitals, visited refugee camps without alerting the press. It wasn't performance. It was empathy disguised as modesty. But fame is fickle. As the world turned more divided, neutrality began to look like indifference. The same silence that once made her graceful now made her suspect. Fans asked where she stood. Activists asked why she wasn't louder. In a culture obsessed with taking sides, Julia's restraint was suddenly read as avoidance. And beneath her composure, that weighed on her. She'd always believed that decency spoke for itself, that kindness didn't need to be shouted to be real. But now, every time she opened her mouth, she felt the invisible tension between authenticity and expectation. How do you stay true to yourself in a world that demands declarations? That's what no one saw, the quiet struggle behind the smile. The woman who'd carried the title of America's sweetheart for decades now faced a new kind of pressure to be not just beloved but believed. So when she agreed to appear on The View, she didn't expect confrontation. She came to talk about a cause close to her heart: clean water projects for women in rural communities. Not to defend her sincerity, but destiny has a way of testing the very things we protect most. So when Whoopi threw her first jab that morning, Julia didn't see a debate. She saw a challenge to everything she stood for. The tension began so subtly, it could have been mistaken for banter. Whoopi leaned forward, elbows on the table, her gaze fixed like a spotlight. "So Julia," she said, voice deceptively calm, "you've been talking about this clean water initiative. It's a beautiful project, really. But be honest with me, are you doing this for the cause or for the cameras?" The air shifted. You could hear the audience's breath hitch, the low hum of whispers threading through the crowd. Julia blinked, caught off guard, a polite smile still frozen in place. "For the cause, of course," she said carefully. "I don't need a camera to care about people." Whoopi tilted her head. "I'm not saying you don't care," she replied, a half-smile tugging at her mouth. "But Hollywood's full of people who find compassion when the press finds them. You get what I mean?" A ripple of laughter broke through the audience, uneasy and nervous. Julia's eyes flickered toward the crowd, then back to Whoopi. "I think we all do what we can," she said softly. "And if people are helped in the process, that's what matters." Whoopi didn't let up. "Sure," she said, leaning in closer. "But isn't that convenient? To do good and look good. Some might say it's less about saving the world and more about staying relevant." The studio temperature dropped. One of the co-hosts shifted, her hand hovering near her mug, pretending to sip. Another mouthed something to a producer offstage. Julia inhaled slowly, that famous calm mask slipping just enough to reveal the hurt beneath. "Relevance isn't my goal," she said, her tone steady but the edges trembling. "I've been doing this for years, quietly. The cameras just caught up." Whoopi raised an eyebrow. "Quietly," she echoed, drawing out the word. "Funny, because I only heard about it once the documentary started filming." The crowd murmured louder this time, gasps, whispers, a few awkward chuckles. The camera zoomed in, catching Julia's flushed cheeks, her hands tightening in her lap. It wasn't supposed to be like this. She'd come to share, to inspire. But suddenly, it felt like she was on trial. And then came the silence, thick, heavy, charged. Julia's eyes lifted, locking with Whoopi's, something unspoken sparking between them, exhaustion meeting defiance. Even the audience felt it, the clash of two worlds, two truths. The producers gestured frantically for a commercial break, but no one dared to move. The moment was alive, electric, irreversible. And just when it seemed Julia would retreat, she straightened in her chair, eyes wet but unflinching. Her voice, when it came, was soft enough to make the room lean in. But it was Julia's next line, quiet, trembling, and devastating, that flipped the entire narrative. Julia sat perfectly still, her silence louder than any defense could have been. The tension coiled so tightly in the room, it was almost audible. A buzzing in the lights, a collective heartbeat waiting for her to crack. But she didn't. Instead, she looked directly at Whoopi, eyes clear and steady, and said, almost in a whisper, "You know what's funny, Whoopi? I agree with you." The audience froze, even Whoopi blinked. Julia leaned in slightly, her tone calm, deliberate, the kind of calm that unnerves more than anger ever could. "You're right. There are a lot of people in Hollywood who talk about compassion because it photographs well, who show up for causes because it keeps them relevant. You've seen them. So have I?" She paused. The room held its breath. "But here's the thing," she continued, her voice strengthening with every word. "If every good deed is automatically labeled fake, what does that leave us with? Cynicism, apathy. We stop believing in the possibility that anyone can act from kindness. And then what kind of world are we defending?" The audience stirred. You could feel the tide turning, slowly, imperceptibly, But undeniably, Julia took another breath. Yes, I'm privileged. I have more than I need. But that doesn't make my heart less human. It doesn't make empathy a performance. If anything, it makes it my duty to show up, to help where I can, and not wait for someone to tell me it's convenient enough to care. Whoopi shifted in her chair. The smirk was gone. The camera caught her expression. A flicker of surprise, maybe even discomfort. Julia pressed on, softly but firmly. We've made a culture where compassion has to defend itself, and where sincerity gets mocked because we've seen too many fakes. But real change doesn't come from skepticism. It comes from hope, and I refuse to stop believing in that. The room was silent now. The applause sign didn't need to flash. People just sat there, caught between awe and reflection. A single cough broke the stillness, and then one person clapped. Slowly, hesitantly. Then another. Within seconds, the entire audience was on its feet. Julia smiled faintly, not triumphant, but relieved, like someone who had carried a truth too long in her chest and finally let it breathe. You don't have to believe me, she said quietly. Just believe that caring isn't a crime. She leaned back in her chair, eyes glistening, her voice trembling only slightly as she added, I didn't come here to win an argument. I came here to talk about water. Because while we're debating sincerity, people out there are dying of thirst. The words landed like thunder, soft but devastating. Whoopi looked down for a moment, her hands folded, her usual quick wit nowhere to be found. The cameras caught everything, the quiet humility of Julia's expression, the crowd's stunned faces, the producer wiping away a tear backstage. For once, the view lived up to its name, showing the world not just another argument, but a rare moment of grace under fire. The audience erupted into applause, the kind that carries gratitude, not spectacle. And somewhere behind the lens, someone whispered, that's going viral. But if the live broadcast stunned the audience, what happened online within the next hour would rewrite the narrative entirely. The moment the credits rolled, the internet caught fire. Within minutes, the clip of Julia's calm takedown flooded every feed, every group chat, every corner of the digital world hungry for something real. TikTokers spliced her words over cinematic music, captions blazing, caring isn't a crime. Twitter turned it into a rallying cry. Femteam Julia trended globally before the next commercial break. Users flooded the comments with gratitude. That's how you speak truth with grace. Finally, someone stood up without screaming. Screenshots of Julia's expression, serene, composed, human, became the new symbol of quiet strength. Meanwhile, the clip of Whoopi shifting uncomfortably in her seat became meme currency. Edits titled, When the Villain Realizes the Hero is Winning, racked up millions of views overnight. Yet, as with every modern controversy, the internet split itself into two camps. Whoopi's defenders came out swinging. She's just being real, they wrote. This generation can't handle tough questions. Commentators on cable shows dissected every syllable, calling it the culture clash of our time. Authenticity versus performance. Realness versus respectability. What began as a talk show argument had become a national referendum on empathy itself. Julia's supporters flooded her Instagram with oceans of heart emojis and messages of pride. Women wrote about being underestimated at work. Immigrants spoke of being told they were too idealistic. And fans shared stories of helping others quietly, without needing to prove it. Julia had become a mirror for everyone who'd ever tried to do good and been accused of pretending. One viral tweet summed it up. She didn't fight to win. She spoke to remind us we can still care and mean it. By evening, every news outlet had replayed the segment. Talk radio called it The View Heard Around the World. Julia's words played over slow piano intros on YouTube compilations with titles like Grace Under Fire, Julia Roberts vs. Whoopi Goldberg. Even late night hosts weighed in half, joking that Julia had done what no politician could, make sincerity cool again. But amid the frenzy, the darker tone of social media began to creep in. Some called it staged. Others accused both women of using controversy to boost ratings. It didn't matter. The moment had already transcended the medium. For millions, Julia's poise wasn't performance. It was proof that compassion could still cut through cynicism. By the next morning, her publicist's phone was melting with interview requests. NGOs wanted her as a spokesperson. Influencers quoted her in pastel font graphics. The world had crowned a new emblem of dignified rebellion. But Julia herself remained silent. No posts, no press, no reaction. Just that still frame, her calm face beneath the studio lights. Echoing across timelines like an open question, can kindness still win in a world addicted to outrage? Fans waited. Reporters speculated. Commentators kept arguing. And then, just as the storm began to peak, Julia finally broke her silence. But in the noise of the internet storm, one quiet message from Julia changed everything again. When Julia finally spoke, it wasn't through a televised interview or a glossy magazine spread. It was through a single Instagram post, black text on a white background, no filters, no photo, no publicist's polish, just words. Simple. Direct. I've been thinking a lot about grace, she wrote. About how easy it is to react and how much harder it is to respond. I don't believe in winning arguments. I believe in understanding people, even when they don't understand me. In less than 10 minutes, the post had tens of thousands of comments. Hearts poured in, applause emojis filled the feed, and fans across generations felt something shift. Julia didn't name Whoopi. She didn't shade anyone. She spoke about compassion like it was oxygen. Invisible but necessary. We live in loud times, she continued. But maybe the answer isn't to be louder. Maybe it's to listen harder. To remember that disagreement doesn't have to mean disrespect. To remember that we're all just trying to matter in our own imperfect ways. People screenshot the words and shared them like scripture. Influencers, journalists, activists, even other celebrities reposted Julia's message, calling it a masterclass in grace. Her silence had been powerful, but her voice, when it finally came, was transformative. The same internet that had spent a week dissecting every second of that interview now fell into collective reflection. Comment threads became confessionals, stories of arguments that turned ugly, friendships lost to political divides, kindness mistaken for weakness. Julia's words had cracked something open, not outrage, but perspective. She ended the post with a single line that felt like both apology and declaration. I walked away because peace is worth protecting. That sentence alone became legend. It was printed on t-shirts, quoted in essays, even turned into fan art. Julia, mid-stride off the set, backlit by studio lights, with the words "peace is worth protecting" hovering above her like a halo. But beneath the viral noise, the heart of her message resonated most deeply with those who understood the loneliness of staying calm in a world that rewards conflict. For immigrants, for idealists, for people who'd ever been told they were too soft. Julia's stance was more than admirable. It was vindicating. She'd shown that restraint wasn't surrender. It was strength. Even Whoopi, days later, addressed the moment on air. We had a difference of opinion, she said quietly. Julia handled it with grace. And I respect that. There was no apology, but there didn't need to be. The acknowledgement was its own kind of peace treaty. And while some commentators kept trying to frame it as rivalry, as Hollywood versus honesty, Julia had already written the narrative. By refusing to fight, she'd won a deeper victory, reminding the world that dignity doesn't shout. It stands still and lets noise pass it by. Her decision to walk away had once looked like retreat. Now, it looked like mastery, the kind of strength that doesn't need to dominate to prove it exists. The following week, a fan left a comment under Julia's post that captured the moment better than any headline ever could. You didn't just leave the table, Julia, you lifted it higher. And maybe that was her final act of power. Not the storm off, not the confrontation, but the quiet reclaiming of peace. A message that transcended celebrity gossip and touched something timeless that authenticity, empathy, and restraint are still revolutionary in an age of outrage. And in that single post, Julia transformed a scandal into a statement. One that every viewer still remembers. The screen fades to a slow scroll of headlines. Julia Roberts redefines grace under fire. When silence speaks louder than shouting. The View meltdown that became a masterclass in humanity. Each one dissolves into clips, people reacting. Fans wiping tears, influencers nodding, quiet moments of reflection behind glowing phone screens. The montage shifts to Julia's words again. Peace is worth protecting. The phrase lingers like an echo, not just a quote, but a challenge. A reminder. Because this wasn't just about a celebrity walking off a talk show. It was about what happens when someone chooses character over chaos. In a world that rewards outrage, Julia chose peace, and in doing so, reminded millions that dignity is not weakness, it's power. We live in times when every argument can go viral, every disagreement can divide. But what Julia showed the world that day is that authenticity doesn't need applause to matter. It just needs courage. The courage to stay true, to stay human, to stay kind. So if you're watching this, and you believe that calm is stronger than cruelty, that grace still matters in a world of noise, don't just scroll past. Share this story. Be part of the conversation that lifts instead of tears down. Because somewhere, someone is watching how you respond to conflict, and your grace might give them permission to rise above it too. This isn't just Julia's story anymore. It's ours. A story about what it means to walk away, not in anger, but in strength. To defend peace like it's sacred. To remember that sometimes the quietest moments echo the loudest, because in the end, grace doesn't fade, it multiplies.